Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Joe Gazzarato, UANA's Chief Strategy Officer, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's presentation on personal brand and sponsorships. Señoras y señores, hola a todos. Mi nombre es Joe Gazzarato, Director de Estrategia de UANA. Bienvenido a esta presentación de lesiones de marca personal a patrocinios. La presentación de hoy será en inglés. Para escuchar la presentación de hoy en español, use la función de traducción de Zoom. Today's presenter is Melanie Beck. Melanie is a marketing professional in the United Kingdom with over 30 years of experience working in all aspects of marketing, ranging from advertising to public relations strategy to sponsorship and brand creation and enhancement. She is currently the chief executive of a business development district in one of the top 10 cities in the UK, representing over 1,200 businesses and 55,000 employees. In her sporting life, she was a diver before moving on to become a coach and judge in the UK. In 2005, she was appointed as the chair of British diving on the same day that London was confirmed as the host of the 2012 Olympic Games. In 2008, Melanie was selected as managing director of the FINA World Diving Series, and in 2009 was appointed to the FINA Technical Diving Committee. In 2013, she was appointed as the honorary secretary of the FINA High Diving Technical Committee. She continues in all three of these positions today. But not only is Melanie a wonderful servant leader in aquatic sports, she's also a leader in her community, and throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, she donated much of her time to delivering food to shielded residents and PPE to hospitals in her community. In October 2020, she was honored by Her Majesty the Queen, who bestowed upon her the Order of the British Empire. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and high privilege today to welcome to our virtual stage, Melanie Beck.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll now just share my screen, I hope. So I'm here this afternoon for me and this morning for most of you to talk to you about social media and building your brand profile and what impact it has on sport as a whole and you as athletes. I'm just going to play you a short video that gives you some idea of the impact that Twitter alone has had on our lives and the lives of business. That short video gives you some idea of the impact that social media has had on all of our lives. Now, some of us like it, as we hear about Vegemite, some of us really enjoy it and some of us really can't stand it. So some people are resistant to social media and some people have embraced it. And you can see from the figures in those videos just what a huge impact it has had on every area of our lives, whether it be political, sporting, social celebrity. We have been impacted by Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, depending on what part of our lives we're in as to which part of the social media platforms we use. So I can guarantee pretty much, and if we're in a conference hall, I can pretty much shame most of you and say, while you're listening to this presentation, you're probably also browsing through a social media channel, because that's what we do. We've suddenly become very good at multitasking, something that we're told men don't do very well, but they seem to be able to do it very well, watching television or talking to their friends and browsing their social media channels. Here are some that was taken at a diving meet when we all went to a World Judges and Coaches Conference, and it showed just how many people were posting during the time of the conference. So what is social media? Well, if you were to look at the Cambridge Dictionary, it has a very clear definition. It's allowing us really to communicate with each other. In the past, we would send letters or we would use the telephone. Now we're very much connected via these digital media channels in different ways, using them in different ways, and to be honest, using them at different points in our life, because some are for much younger people and some are for business, and some relate to the older generation like me. But they all have their own form. Facebook is an information hub and one of the most used, probably the most common across the world. Twitter engagement is all about real time, about now, it's about in the moment. Instagram is where you'll find people boasting about their lives and how successful their lives are, or things they've done, new house purchases, new shoes they might have bought. So it's very much an inspirational. Snapchat is about pictures. It's just about sending pictures backwards and forwards, and as soon as you've opened them, they're disappeared. And you sort of think, why is that interesting? Well, kids seem to like it, and they probably use Snapchat more than anything in terms of sharing their most intimate information. Messenger is used as just a chit chat, whether it be WhatsApp or the Facebook Messenger service or WeChat. We love to chat away on there as much as we can. And actually that's taken over very much from the more historic use of the telephone or writing letters. And YouTube, as you've just seen from the video that I've just played for you, because that was actually a YouTube video, that's all about video sharing, music sharing, and again, is a very successful digital channel. Most marketing people, sponsorship people are using a mix of all of these digital channels to ensure that they build their profile. So what is the impact on this? You know, if we look back 15 years, social media really didn't have any impact in our lives at all. And the first one we were all aware of was Facebook, and we all got very excited and had Facebook profiles. But just to give you some idea of the impact social media has had on the world, 59% of the world access some form of internet channel. 91% of that is done on a mobile device, and China leads the way with over 904 million internet uses. That is quite some incredible statistic. But actually 2.89 million people are active every month on social media. And again, 2.69 of those are on a mobile device. So it just shows you how mobile people are. Don't have to be at home to be looking at your media channels. You don't have to be at home to engage. You don't have to be at home to consume media channels. You can be anywhere at any point in your life, at any point in the day to understand and look and see what your friends or other people you're interested in, people you follow, news channels you might follow, to see what's happening in the world. 2.7 million people a month use Facebook, and most of them are the millennial age group. So again, you bring in that age group generation. So when you're looking at building your profile, you need to be clear what digital channels that you're using to align yourself to the right one, to the audience that you're trying to get to. Interestingly enough, 99% of the people in the United Arab Emirates have some kind of digital profile. That drops down a little bit, but not a lot. Taiwan is the next. South Korea after that, which is probably why we were very active out in Gwangju 2 years ago when we were all there for the World Swimming Championships. We saw a lot of upweighting of FINA's digital presence, particularly out in South Korea, because of that statistic. Yourselves, Canada, you're 67%, America 70%, Mexico 69%, but you're all pretty high up on the indices of people consuming social media channels and digital media. United Kingdom, we're a little bit behind the time, we were only at 66. We take a little bit of time to trust things and join the club, but you seem to be a bit ahead of us in the Americas. So it's quite an impactful media. People thought it was going to be here for a very short amount of time, but the reality is that social media in all its forms, and the forms that will come with the next generation of social media channels, will be here to stay, and will be the way in which we communicate, both in our private life, but also in our professional life. So you can see the impact that these social media channels have had over the last 2 years. Okay, most of us have been at home, so we've probably been looking at something to do because of the pandemic. So there is a big increase on the use of social media because of the way our lives have changed in the last 12 months. But 2.45 billion uses of Facebook across the world, 2 billion uses of YouTube, 2 billion uses of WhatsApp. These are just massive, incredible figures. And if you looked at this 20 years ago, you would never have believed that we were going to have such an enormous change in the way in which we communicated with people. And of course, with that change in communication also comes some problems, which I'll touch on as we go further into the presentation. So bringing it back to the area that we're most interested in, which is in our sporting life, what role does it play for us? Well, actually sport in particular has been one of the areas that have really grasped the use of social media the most, because it's very personable, it's very engaging. And so a lot of sport is now consumed on the mobile devices and on social media channels. And you can see that 93% of global sports leaders believe that social media engagement of fans will grow over the next 5 to 10 years. And you're seeing that experimentally over the course of this 10 years. We are seeing how fast social media is grabbing hold and providing us with instant information on sporting stars, on sports events that are going on. I'm sure we all have notifications when our favourite football teams just scored, or the cricket's happened somewhere across the world. We know instantaneously what's happened. We know if they've done something that probably isn't appropriate. It's splashed all over our social media channels, but we celebrate their achievements, and we celebrate personal achievements. It's all about creating a value for both the sport and the profile of the people. And we see that a lot in some of our more prestigious celebrity sports stars. We're also seeing a lot of sporting organisers grappling with the use of new technology, and you're seeing a lot more use of the hashtag in order to try and grow followers, to increase audiences. And FINA themselves, in particular, use a lot around different events, world-class events, with the FINA Diving World Series, with FINA Diving, with FINA Worlds. I'm sure we've all seen how many of those are popping up if we follow FINA, or in fact we follow in my case in Europe, Len, and for you, UANA. So we are seeing a lot more use of hashtags and tagging in order to grow social media audiences. 61% of sport now is actually followed on a digital channel. So that's enormous exposure. It's not all about the broadcasters anymore. A lot of it is all about social media and digital channels. And therefore you're seeing a lot of the traditional broadcasters also having online capabilities as well. And 40% increase in 2017 of sharing sports-related clips on internet platforms. We love our sport. We love to share anything that we can get our hands on to make sure people are aware, our friends are aware, to spread that message about sport. We are a sporting world. So who are the top performers on some of these channels? This is quite interesting if you have half an hour and you haven't got anything to do, to just drill down and ask the questions. So somebody called Cristiano Ronaldo, I think he's a football player, I'm sure most of you know who he is topping the Facebook poll in terms of his profile on Facebook as a media channel. Shakira, Real Madrid. So people are using it both as personal profiling, and also sporting organisations use it to profile their clubs. I took it down a little bit further. Many of you may not know, I'm sure you all know Jason Statham for his Hollywood blockbuster movies, but some of you may not know that Jason Statham was actually a British diver, and he performed for us on the British team in the 80s and represented us at the Commonwealth Games. He has 71 million. I'd like to say that's because of his sporting background. I think it's probably more to do with his Hollywood pedigree. But Michael Phelps has 8.8 million. Tom Daley is probably another big star, 2.4 million. And then you can see some of the ones that are at the moment very active as sports stars out there who are still active. They are down at the 66,000, 40,000, because they're building their profile. They're still active, and therefore they probably don't spend so much time on feeding their digital channels, but they're still up there. They're still great figures. Looking at Twitter, Katy Perry tops the Twitter. Twitter is a very immediate information sharing. If you want to get something out to the digital masses, then people are using Twitter. They're commenting on anything from politics, from business, through to personal experiences, and they have huge followings. And of course, they've been very much in the news recently because they've barred some people off of the Twitter platform, and that's made some questions be answered about whether that's appropriate and democratic. You've got Barack Obama, who has been consistently up at the top of the Twitter feeds. Twitter themselves actually are very high up as something that we follow. So we're also interested in what the owner of Twitter is doing as much as we're interested in what our celebrity and sporting stars are doing. And again, if you look down this slide, you'll see Tom Daley's doing quite well. Michael Phelps has 2 million, Adam Peaty 99k, he's going to break that million mark soon, I'm sure. And FINA are also making inroads through their digital channel, which they only brought to the digital channel market a few years ago. So they're already starting to have quite a big impact on building their profile. And then we have the Instagram performers. Again, Cristiano Ronaldo's up there, Ariana Grande and The Rock Johnson. And then again, we have some fairly good figures for some of our own sporting stars. 3.3 million for Michael Phelps, 2 million for Tom Daley, and Adam Peaty just coming up to the 500,000 mark, and Sarah and Katie Ledecky also. But again, I can't stress that the people that are still active as sports stars probably not putting so much concentrated effort into building their profile, but starting to create a profile for themselves so that when they do decide to leave swimming or diving, they've already got a good head start on being able to maximise their profile and their brand, their personal brand. So how are they using them? Well, They're using them in a variety of ways. They're using it to talk about themselves and their lives, and that's really a personal choice on how much they want to share about their lives. They're talking about their product promotion, and I'll come on in a little bit to explain how an athlete can start to achieve creating a brand that is attractive to promotional brands and sponsorship. And he uses other opportunities in that he's looked at his market and he has looked at where there's gaps in the market. And you can see that he's averaging around 100,000 likes up to 240,000 likes. So he's doing pretty well at getting engagement out of his followers. Patrick Hausting, who's a German diver, he's not as well known as Tom Daley, but he's doing pretty well, and he also is using those media as an optimizing way of building his personal brand. Melissa Wu, an extremely long-term diver from Australia, also done incredibly well at being able to attract product promotion through her digital channels. And she again is using that to enhance her personal profile and to increase her brand power for when she decides to retire from her sport, because all of that will help her build a career into the future. Greg Louganis, who we all know and love from many years ago, he's pretty active, and he's taken his digital channel from being a sports star and built it around things that he has a great interest in, and he uses it in a way to promote his motivational speaking, the acting. I think he's done some celebrity appearance in dancing, and continuing to build his brand across all the media that he possibly can. A lot of these people, when they're building that brand, will also have had some consultation help to try and find their strategy to ensure that they're building their brand in a way that has some longevity going forward. And you can see the use of hashtags, heavy use of hashtags here, because hashtags are what make you start to build your profile out in the market. You can link things that are relative to whatever you're posting, which expands your engagement, expands your audience. And when you're doing that, people start to follow you because you're telling them something of interest. So using those hashtags, using those tags of other people, other brands, other names, all help build your audience. So when you're starting out, really think through about how you can build your audience, tagging on to people that already have a strong profile, tagging on and hashtagging things that are of importance to you. In this case, Melissa's been using that device for product promotion. She is one of her sponsors is Funkita Swimwear, so she uses that in a really clever way to engage. It's a young brand, and she gets a big following from using those posts. But on the flip side, she's also using her community CSR, and she's doing that by tapping into some charitable and community types of activity. With Tom, he uses his across a range of things. He was very clever after the 2012 games, and he identified that the sporting market is a very cluttered market, particularly on digital. And so he wanted to make his way into starting to build his profile. And he is a big cook. He likes cooking. He does a lot of it in his spare time. If you live close to Tom and you're a friend, he has a Tuesday night supper club. And so he's used that as a way of building a brand for himself that's not just all about sport. And he has, in the last few years, published 2 cooking books, and he uses that to build a different audience from his sporting audience. We also, in this country particularly, he's a bit of a poster boy for us. So like all celebrities, we're interested in what's happening in his life. He got married, he's had a child. He's taken up knitting during pandemic. So his posts currently are all about his knitting of jumpers for various members of his family, and also about things that he makes to raise money for charity. And he's a big ambassador for Adidas. So he's using his channels for product promotion, to promote himself and to keep people's awareness of himself so that he enhances his engagement with his audience by sharing things that he's doing about himself and about his sponsorship partnerships. So how can you build a personal brand? Because I'm sure that's what you're really interested in today. I think you have to start this process by doing a fair amount of personal reflection. So you need to think about what are your personal values, because you don't want to sell your soul just to get yourself a digital profile. So you need to think about who you are and what you value most in your life. You need to think about the things that matter to you. You need to think about your personal profile and what you want to use it for and how you want it to develop, because you can't do it all at once. So you need to think about the stages of how you want to build your brand. Does it start with your sport? Does it build into your personal life? Does it build into the things that you find important, the wider part of your life? Does it talk about any charity work you might do? And you really need to plan in a segmented way how you want to build your profile. You also want to think through carefully whether you want to be political. Are you going to use it as a political platform? We've seen a lot over the last few months and over certainly the last 18 months, the rise of the Black Lives Matters campaign, a very, very important campaign and one that needs to be raised. And some sporting stars have chosen to use it as a way of building their profile and aligning their values and things that are really important to them. And part of that process, when you're doing that self-reflection, is thinking about how you can align those values and those things that are really important to you in building your sponsorship partners, because you create your sponsorship partners that are aligned with your values. So you're not going to support something that you aren't comfortable with, that you feel would be something that you might have to talk about in the future and you'd feel uncomfortable talking about it. So you need to really think carefully through those stages of what it is you want your profile to be about and how much of yourself you're prepared to share on your media channels. And then you have to think through whether or not, when you're looking at sponsors, whether you're going to segment that down. You see a lot of sponsorship partnerships, they'll have one brand in the sportswear that they support, and they're exclusive to that brand. They'll have one drink provider, whether it be nutrition drinks or sporting drinks. They'll wear one type of clothing that they're prepared to support. So they will have drilled down into those sectors, rather like other big businesses that are looking at sponsorship. If you're running a major event, they also look at how they can segment their sponsorship deals to give them the biggest bang for their buck, being exclusive to those sectors. And you also have to be very clear when you're embarking on building your profile about your no-go areas, because it's very, very easy, because of the nature of digital, that it's an open forum, it's public, you do get trolled, you will get comments, you'll get negative comments as well as positive ones. And we've all heard throughout our media lives about trolling and some of the really awful stories that have happened to people that have affected their mental health. So you really need to remember that when you're putting something up on those social media channels, that is there, it's going to be there forever, and it will come back to haunt you. So be very careful about how much you share, particularly if you had a few to drink or you're at a party and you're being a bit silly. Be careful not to hit those digital media channels, because they're public and they can come back and remind you that maybe that was a silly night that you shouldn't be repeating. So be very, very sensible about mapping out what you want your profile to be on digital channels. I tell a lot of people that I talk to, students, to be very careful what they put on social media channels, because when they apply to college, the first thing colleges look at are their social media channels to see what type of person you are. So be very aware when you're creating that profile be sure that you've thought through what you want to put out into the public profile, into the public domain. I've already spoken a little bit about the power of hashtagging and the power of tagging, building audiences. If you hashtag, you grab people's engagement, and if you tag two people, so if you have a good relationship with somebody that's got a very big profile, somebody like Tom Daley, and you tag them, then you're building your audience, because you're tapping into their audience as well. You know you've made it when they start to tag you back. So be very clear. Look at your hashtags. A lot of social media channels help you with those hashtags by putting up ideas when you're typing it in. But make sure you think about hashtagging and tagging as a vehicle to build your audience. And then you look at what some of our businesses and some of our sporting organisations are doing in order to be able to do exactly what you're wanting to do with your personal profile. They're wanting to increase the exposure of their events. They're wanting to be able to do that so they can attract more sponsors. They want to raise the profile of you as athletes, because again, that helps to build the sporting engagement value, and it also helps to build their profile. So when as a sporting organisation, you're embarking on their campaign for social media, there are times, if you are performing in your sport, where you will be used by those organisations to build their own following. So it's about a partnership. There's no money changing hands on this one, unless you've got an agent who negotiates you a nice deal because you have a good profile, but you are being used. It's a reciprocal agreement that you will tag and they will tag you. And this is very cost effective, and it creates millions of impacts, which means you're, as alongside your sporting organisation, you yourself are building your profile. So make sure you talk to the people within your organisation and find out what they're intending to do as their campaign around a major event, and think about how you can use your activity to dovetail into theirs in order to help you to increase your value. And if they ask you to take part in media interviews, they ask you to take part in podcasts, do it. You might think, oh, but it's going to maybe cut into my training. If you can do it without it impacting your performance, do it. It's more exposure. You can then link your profile to that podcast, to that media interview, and it raises your profile. It isn't just about you, it's about them as well. It's a partnership approach. And some of the ways that we do that is we make sure that when you come to any of the major events, we're creating a stage for you. You can see in the background on some of these visuals, some of the events we've managed over the last 10 years. We've really tried to move venue branding along, create a theatre for our sport. It started out with just some fancy branding and some fancy illustrations, moved on much further for those who were in Budapest. Obviously, a lot of sound and music used to raise the profile of the event. Again, great for broadcast, brilliant for you because you're the star appearing within that venue branding. And that is what it's all about. You want to be seen in those environments. You want your event organisers, your federations, your regional federations to use those sorts of techniques to raise your profile. Everything about that video that you've just seen is about you. You as sports people, you as coaches, you the athlete, it's centric to you. And that all helps to increase your brand value when you're out there talking. So if you're aligning yourself to these events, if you're being helpful when you're asked at these events to participate, you can use that to build your brand profile. And as I said earlier, it's all about theatre now. It's all about the power of the audience, whether it be on the mobile, on the digital channels, or whether it be on broadcast. It's all about creating theatre. And we've seen how that's been done really successfully over the last couple of years. This is a video that I took on my mobile phone, so I'm very sorry for the quality, but this gives you some idea of just what it was like in Budapest for the audience. Isn't that amazing? That's what it's about. That's how we attract more spectators to our events. I have to hold my allegiance. I am from the diving community, but I went to the swimming and my jaw dropped when I saw the music, the light, the theatre, the way in which the athletes were being presented, the star quality that was being created, and it made great TV and it makes great social media content for people who've never been to a swimming event, never been to water polo or artistic swimming. Suddenly we're creating a really vibrant environment for our sport. Diving's very visual, but having seen Budapest, swimming can be visual, artistic swimming is very visual, particularly visual. Water polo is exciting, high diving is extreme. So all of our 6 disciplines have something that captivates the audience. What you have to do as the athlete is be able, or the coach, is to take that type of activity and turn it into your social media content, because that's what builds your profile. Working on these events, we do everything that we can to ensure we create as much content as we can to be used not just on the television, but also across social media channels. So we're constantly looking at how we can create better camera positions, different camera angles, under the water, on top and below the water, you name it, we're trying to find ways. How quickly you're twisting in the air, how quickly we're somersaulting in the air, how fast you're entering the water. So all of these things are really important to our audiences now. So you start putting those things into your social media content about what you do as your sport, about you and your sponsors and your partnerships. You become a really interesting person to anybody who's looking for something to read when they're bored watching the television, or they really want to know more about your sport, really want to know more about you. So never stop testing things that you put on your content to see how people engage with it, see how many likes you get, how many shares, how many retweets. Play, see how it works for you. There's nothing wrong all the time you're using sensible content. Be careful when you're using political statements or going down particular areas that might come back to haunt you. But generally, use good content that engages, that questions, that asks people to engage and to get involved. We love an emotion. And one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to get athletes and coaches more involved with what happens on the pool deck. And there is some resistance. And what I will say to you on this today is don't be scared of it. Don't step away from being in a kiss and cry area. Make sure your coach is there, make sure your athlete's there, show the raw emotion of the moment. If anybody watches the Winter Olympics, they've done phenomenally well at showing some of those more extreme sports and showing the raw emotion, showing the comradeship between the athletes. We want to make sure we do more of that in our sport, more sharing, more showing of how much we're in touch with each other, our friendships, our bonds, how we get through a really grueling competition or not, what we're prepared to say about a competition if we've just really failed. That all great content, it's what builds our audience. And if you want to have a really good profile, you've got to be prepared to be out there and put that stuff out there for yourself. And that includes your coaches. Don't let them hide behind the bags or just the person sitting on the benches. Get them there, interact with them, use it as your content, use it as your story. When it's joyful, use that story. When it's all a bit of a failure and there's lots of tears, as hard as it is, it's what sells you. It's what creates your audience. It's what builds your profile. That you're prepared to go out there and say, you know, today was not a good day in the office, but tomorrow I'm going to come back stronger. We love a failure that comes back good. And that's why people like me are hounding you when you're on the deck saying, move your bags, move your drinks bottles, move everything, because we're trying to create a really good theatre for you to perform and for you to be able to be seen at your best. So if you get somebody like me in a blazer, in a t-shirt, comes over and says, please, can you clear your bag away? Can you go here? Can you go there? Can you go to the media zone? Or whatever else we ask you to do, please do it, because ultimately you can use all of that on your content, your experiences, talking about it across Twitter, across Instagram, picture of yourself with a journalist in Instagram. Don't be afraid to share that type of content, because that's what makes you interesting. And so help us to help you. Be where we want you to be, interact with the cameras, make sure that you follow people like UANA and Fina and Len and some of your other athletes, and use that content to build your own content. The more attractive you are to a sponsor, the more interesting you are, the more multifaceted you are, the more channels you use, the more likelihood you will get awareness, and the more chance you are that you'll be able to forge some of those promotional sponsorship things that are really valued to you as partnerships, that again help you to build profiles that move you on to being known in a much wider audience of people. So don't forget the mix zone. We all moan about it, but make sure you interact in the mix zone and make sure that you're always ready to do your content, always ready to put something up about something that's happened to you at today's competition, or something that's happening in your training, something that's happened that's a wider environment to your training or your college or what it is that you're doing. Be prepared to get involved and always think about how you can use it to build your content and engage. Don't just put up statements, get people to like what you're saying or not like it. Use polling features, use some of the amazing features that you have all over the social media digital panels to make your content more interesting, whether it be the little glistening stars around you, whether it be crying tears because you've had a bad competition. Use it. Use all those tools to make your content pop out of the screen above everybody else, because otherwise it just becomes wallpaper. So you've got to make yourself stand out in front of the crowd. And if you do that, then people start to make videos like this about you. So help us to make you stars. Aquatic sport is one of the most visual, most spectator sports in the world. We get to go to incredible places around the world, different pools, whether domestically, regionally, or internationally. We get to create our craft and be our stars in some phenomenal venues shown on this slide at the moment. So just remember, wherever you are, think about what you can do to build your brand using something that's always in your hand. Your mobile phone is always there. So you use it to captivate, to engage, and to showcase your personal brand. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Melanie. And Melanie, if you wouldn't mind, our production team would like us to actually, for me to share a screen with our social media handles for UANA here for our folks to follow us. So if you could stop sharing your screen and I'll put up mine.
Okay.
And then we'll move right into our Q&A. We've received a couple questions throughout the presentation, but if anybody has questions moving forward, please go ahead and use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Type your question in and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If we're unable to get to your question during the live session, we will send Melanie a list of questions and we'll provide written answers within about a week. So we'll start with one of our first questions here. Melanie, I'm a coach and searching for ways to promote artistic swimming through my social media. I've been sharing helpful technical tips to help grow since 2015. Do you have any other suggestions on how we can build or attract attention to our sport in any other way using social media?
Sure, yes. Well, technical tips are fine, but they're only going to be interesting to people who are performing in artistic swimming. So if you want to grow an audience that is interested in your sport, not just participating in the sport, then you need to widen your content. And the good way of doing that is maybe to put up some of the outstanding, I'm a big fan of artistic swimming. I think, you know, what happens in the water with artistic swimming is incredible, and showing some of that power, how they're lifted out of the water, what goes on under the water, is probably some of the most interesting content that you can see about artistic swimming. So I would be using that type of thing. I would be doing some profiles on some of your athletes and talking about how they train and some of the things that happen outside of the pool that helps to create the next routine. So I'd widen your content, not just make it all about technical tips.
Awesome, thank you. So a couple questions here for thinking about building brands. One question that came in, are there numbers that show that higher the followers, that directly results in larger dollars for sponsorships or increase in sales?
I think there are a lot of things come in measurables around how somebody's profile or an athlete is valued. And it's about how not only how much they're followed, how much they attract an audience, but it's also about the range of things that they're interested in, because that creates different audiences. So to a brand, if you're a very young brand, you're only going to really be interested in the engagement with a young audience. But if you're a multi-generational brand, you're going to want to know that the profile of that athlete is across a multiple generation profile. So you're valued depending on what your sponsorship partner is looking for. And that's why I said in the presentation, understanding your own values, aligning your values to that of the sponsor so that you have a really good fit, and then you can extend that and work together to create what they want out of the partnership and what you want out of the partnership. If you've got a mismatch and you've got a young brand, but actually you're attracting a middle-aged audience, then the partnership's never going to work.
Makes sense.
You need to understand what are they in it for, And whatever they're in it for, you need to make sure that you're answering that by delivering what they're looking for.
Awesome. So, coupling a couple questions we've had come in together here. Um, One of our attendees has asked, at what age do you think an athlete should start thinking about to create their own personal brand? And then another attendee has asked, if it's under the age of 18, how do you handle that for a minor athlete?
Yeah, well, you've got all the safeguarding issues that we deal with all the time, and it's quite difficult, as we all know, to monitor what people under the age of 18 are doing on social media channels, and that is a concern. So I think you can help yourself with that by ensuring within your coaching regulations, your team regulations, you have something that covers off social media usage, that gives you some degree of clarity around what they should and shouldn't be doing. And I think it's really important outside of training to have your athletes go through some degree of social media training, so they think before they send, before they publish. They're thinking about some of the things I've said today. Is this going to come back to haunt me in a few years' time if I put something up that really in 5 years' time isn't going to be appropriate content, that might come back and remind me I was in a silly stage of my life? So I can't stress, if you're dealing with under 18s, make sure that within your club setup or within your team setup, if you're a national team or an age group or a junior team, have some training, have somebody come in and talk to them about what building a social media profile means and some of the pitfalls. Because
Awesome. So,
it's here to stay, Joe. It's not going anywhere.
no, I think we've seen that. I think it's stuck around than many of us had longer than have ever expected when it first launched. So dovetailing off of that a little bit, another question for you is it ever too late to start building your personal brand? Let's say we have some individuals who are, maybe have not taken advantage of social media until recently, but have been around the sports for a while. Is it too late for them to get started?
It's never too late. Never ever too late to start building your profile. From the first thing you post, you're already doing it. So, and what you'll find is it's really quite interesting after 12 months. If you look back at your posts and you see, we all get these little reminders, you posted this a year ago or 5 years ago or 6 years ago. That's when, again, I say there are things on there that maybe you don't want to be reminded of, but we get those reminders of what we're doing. And so you can build your brand from the first content you put on, whether you're 18 years old or whether you're 55 years old. You're building your brand because you're sharing about you're sharing about your values, the things that interest you, your strengths and weaknesses. So it's never too late to start, but be very clear about what you want your social media to be for you.
Awesome. So, dovetailing off of that one and that last point you made, being very clear about what you want your brand and your social media to be. How do you control or how do you handle, what are strategies for handling when you have media using your image or your brand? Maybe it's not the way you had intended it to be, but it's out of your control for the media, right? How do we handle or cope with that?
I tell lots of people, whether they be businesses or whether they be individuals, just remember that social media is public. Anything that you put out there, you can't monitor, you can't control. So that's why at the beginning of the presentation, I said, be very reflective in what you want to use your social media channels for before you start, because you can't control them. If you open up a blogging site, you're asking people to comment. You're putting information out there for them to comment. If they don't like what you're saying, you can't control them telling you what they think of you. So really be very clear what it is that you want to put out that is public, and be clear about what are your no-go areas. I don't want to share this about me. And you've seen it recently. Certainly we have here, and I'm sure it's across the world, that you're seeing many more athletes coming out talking about mental health and well-being, or things that have happened to them in sport that 5 years ago they probably would have been really uncomfortable in sharing. But even when they're sharing that information, you're always going to get people that want to take them on, that want to give their view, that you probably created that situation for yourself. So you've got to be ready to understand you're not always going to get positive, and you're not always going to get applauded and celebrated. Sometimes you might just hear something you don't want to hear, and you have to be ready to understand how you're going to deal with that.
Makes sense. So switching gears here a little bit, we have a question actually.
Joe, I just say, sorry to
Of
interrupt,
course.
don't ever be defensive. Don't ever come out and try and take that person on. Let them have their say, move on. If you engage when somebody's having a go at you, you're going to send it up and it's going to become more interesting to the rest of the crowd. So don't engage.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So we actually have a question here that comes from Steve McFarlane, the CEO of Duraflex, who's the sponsor for today's presentation. And switching gears a little bit, as we've had many virtual events in the past, the last now almost 11 months, do you think engagement with virtual conventions and virtual events like this one will continue as hybrid events in the post-COVID world? And how can we leverage those new, although not social platforms, virtual platforms for brands and sponsorships, both as individuals, but also as organizations, as clubs, or even corporations?
I think this is here to stay. I think one of the deliverables of the pandemic has been that we have found ways to continue to do business and to communicate with each other. And it doesn't matter whether you're using Zoom or Ring Central or Teams or House Party. We've all found ways to either have professional business meetings, or we've found ways to chat with our friends, and people have had Christmas dinners, with their friends by just having a Zoom meeting at the same time. So it's here to stay. I think one of the advantages is it's much cheaper way of connecting people. We no longer have to travel to one location and pay expensive hotel bills to have a conference like this. So I think this is probably one of the plus points. This is something that probably would have taken 10 years for us to be comfortable with, and we've had to become comfortable with it in 12 months. What we have to be really aware of is that we don't get virtual fatigue, because we're spending so much time talking to little boxes that you start to decide what it is that you want to attend, because it's amongst so many other meetings. So you're being maybe a little bit more choosy. And that's where you have to be very clever with the availability of the technology, where you can arrange meeting rooms. I attended something this week which was in place of a lunch where we normally have 24 tables of 12, and we actually had that lunch. Obviously, there's no food involved unless you cooked it yourself, but we were moving around tables. You could move in and out of meeting rooms and still be doing all your networking. So you've got to use the technology in a really interesting, vibrant way, so that people want to go to something on the virtual platform, because they're not just sitting looking at a television screen. So it's all down to how you use the technology and how you animate and engage with the person at the other end of the screen.
Makes sense. Engagement is key, especially in these virtual settings, where in-person settings, it's so much more difficult to be easily distracted versus on a screen, click away or something. Really needing to maintain audience engagement is important in these virtual events.
Yeah, on the flip side, when you're doing it, in the real, you can see people's responses. You can see how people's body language is working towards what you're telling them, whether they're sitting up or whether they're looking at the social media. So you know what's happening. When you're doing something like this, you're talking to yourself on the screen, basically. So you don't have that interaction. So you have to try and find ways that, and hence why I've used videos, because I've tried to create some sort of highs and lows to the presentation, information provide, but also videos. So I think you need to think about your content. It's back to the same thing. You've got to be good with your content.
Awesome. So a couple last questions here for you. One of them comes from an attendee who asks, do you have any advice for smaller teams that are trying to use social media to build sport in their area? Particularly, some sports such as artistic swimming are very niche and might be difficult to sell in those areas. How can we leverage these platforms to bring awareness and increase membership through our team's brand? In this, especially in this day and age.
Sure. And it goes back a little bit to what I answered earlier. Unfortunately, the synchronized swimming, as it used to be known, was known for nose clips and smiles and funny walks. That's how people who didn't know anything about the sport categorized synchronized swimming. And the one thing I can't stress enough about artistic swimming is that it is probably one of the sports where the people participating in it are probably one of the fittest I've ever seen. I mean, geez, who can hold their breath for that long under the water and do all that stuff they're doing is incredible. And some of the stuff they do outside the water to be prepared to be able to do that, all of those stories, particularly in a team environment, not a duet, is really interesting. How they form, how they do it all under the water, how on earth they get the girls thrown up in the air like they do. What's the story behind artistic swimming? What's the heritage? How did it come about? If you're old like me, I remember the Hollywood movie star, but there is a history to that sport. Tell it. It's interesting to brands. That artistic swimming is one of the biggest untold stories of aquatics. It's the hidden secret, and the stories behind it are just phenomenal. And you tell it. Don't expect people to know. Go out and knock their socks off with some of the information about how fit those girls are and what they really have to do under the water, and forget it being all about the shapes.
So, an interesting question, sort of tailing off of the last part of your answer there, and hitting home the message about making sure you're telling the story, the interesting story, right? What are the first steps to using your story to actually attract sponsors? If let's say we have a great social media platform or, a great profile, right? But how do you catch the eye of a sponsor with your story?
Start tagging them. Tag them. They're not, just tag the company name and start doing it regularly. Talk about something that you both have an alignment with, something that's interesting. If they're a health food brand or vitamins, or whether they be, an interesting type of crop top to do gym wearing, start tagging them into your content. Get them to know you. So they start to see, well, who is this person? Oh, it's them again. Before you know it, they'll be contacting you, asking you to be a brand ambassador.
So you have to be proactive about it. They're not going to reach out to you necessarily.
No, I mean, a couple of times I've put content up and I've had people say to me, oh, I've seen your content around fitness, would you be a brand ambassador? You know that you are doing the right thing when you start to get people contacting you doing that. And it's only because of the hashtags and the tags that you're doing that creates that profile and that recognition of you. And they then start to follow you because they want to know more about you. And before you know, you've already got some kind of relationship. So you're not going on cold door knocking, because they know a little bit about you, you know a little bit about them. You can grow that relationship.
Perfect. Another question here. So, for athletes that may participate in multiple sports or be involved in multiple activities, does that potentially dilute their personal brand or attractiveness to sponsorships? Is it okay to go wide instead of go deep?
I think it's a more opportunity to build, to make you look more rounded as a person if you've got all of these interests. What you have to be careful to do is to manage the relationships you might build that are to do with one thing and not another thing, because you might then start to confuse your personal brand. So you have to think about what it is you want to achieve by being more scattergun in your approach. You're much better if you can keep it slim, focused, and build from there, because you start to build, you can widen the brief, but if you go out wide first, it's difficult to bring it back.
That makes sense. And one final question here for our folks who maybe are involved in our master's programs and our master's disciplines here. What advice do you have for athletes that want to continue building their brand after they retire from what we would consider the non-masters versions of the sports, but remain active in those programs?
Well, you're still active. You've still got things to tell. You've still got views, opinions, attitudes. You're still holding the same level of interest, whether you're participating or retired. And if you've built your profile, people already know about it, so you can then exploit the profile that you've already built. If you're starting out, you just become a really interesting person.
Awesome. Well, that answers our concludes our question and answers for today. Thank you very much, Melanie, for your time and for putting together this wonderful presentation and sharing your wisdom with us and our audience here today. We want to give one big final shout out to Duraflex and a huge thank you for sponsoring this presentation here today. Reminder for folks that the presentation recording will be available on UANA's YouTube channel in about a week. If there are any questions that you had that were not able to be answered today, we will send those over to Melanie and provide written responses in about a week, and those will be available as well. And then we really encourage all the participants to please go ahead and take the survey that we'll send to you here in about a week, so you can share your feedback. And the next time we host a convention like this, we can incorporate it and do even better. So with that, I thank everybody for attending. Hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day, and a big special thank you to Melanie once again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.